And we are live. Good evening, everyone. I'm Avisa from Uncle Bobbie's Coffee and Books, and I am so excited that we're able to come together tonight to celebrate the debut of this fantastic novel, The Other Black Girl by Zakiya Dalila Harris. You'll be joined tonight in conversation by fellow author Raven Leilani, whose debut novel, Luster, has been bringing us loads of Black Girl magic since it came out last summer. So thank you all for being here. Before we get started, I wanted to remind you all that there's going to be an audience question and answer session after the discussion. And we encourage you to please submit your questions over the course of the conversation using the Ask a Question module at the bottom of the screen. If you have not already gotten your copy of The Other Black Girl, please do so now by clicking the green button below, which will take you to Uncle Bobbie's online bookshop. Or if you can come by Uncle Bobbie's in person, if you happen to be in Philly, pick up a copy which will have, we have signed book plates in limited supply. Now, my wonderful readers, let's get into it. Our moderator today is Raven Leilani. Raven's work has been published in Granta, the Yale Review, McSweeney's Quarterly Concern, Conjunctions, The Cut, and the New England Review, among other publications. She received her MFA from NYU and was an Axon Foundation writer in residence. Luster is her first novel, and it will be out in paperback next week, June 8th. Please welcome Raven Leilani. Hi, Raven.
Hi. Thank you
Welcome.
for that.
Thanks for being here. Okay, and now for our featured author. Zakiya Dalila Harris worked for nearly 3 years in editorial at Knopf Doubleday before leaving to write The Other Black Girl, which is her debut novel, we're all here for. Prior to that, Zakiya received her MFA in creative writing from the New School. Her essays and book reviews have appeared in Guernica and The Rumpus. She lives in Brooklyn. Welcome, Zakiya.
Hi. Hi. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so excited to have you both here. I was saying before, I'm a big fan of both of you. I feel like both of your books are just, they spoke to me, and I know many other readers as well in our reading community. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Zakiya, could you just start us off by telling us a little bit about the book?
Yes. First of all, I have to say and gush how much I loved Luster. The amount it spoke to me. I remember hearing about it last year. I read that amazing, gorgeous profile of you in the Times. And now I've been thinking about it and couldn't wait to read it. And I read it earlier this year. And I'm so sad it took me that long. But I am so excited I did, because I really got to just like roll around in it. So thank you for writing it. Okay, sorry. So The Other Black Girl mainly follows a young woman named Nella Rogers, who has been the only Black person working at Wagner Books for the last 2 years in Manhattan. She is very much the only one, of course, who has to experience all the microaggressions. She is the spokesperson for all the Black people on the planet. So she's really excited when Hazel, another young Black woman, starts working next to her. But then things get very uncomfortably weird in the office, and Nella starts to wonder about Hazel's intentions. Is she friend or foe? And then also unfolding at the same time are the stories of three other Black women, who are also all struggling to succeed in the white world of media, of publishing in New York. But they're all 4 of these women are bound by one very chilling, dark secret. So that's The Other Black Girl in a nutshell, without any spoilers.
Ooh,
dun, dun,
dun. So, yeah, I guess we could just start with, I'd like to know, with your editor's background, how did this book come together?
Yeah. I mean, definitely would say I started writing this book in my cubicle, so I'll be upfront and say that a lot of it's inspired from my time working in publishing, of not having it nearly as bad as Nella. Thankfully, I was not the only one, but I still saw, how non-diverse publishing was, and was the only Black woman in editorial at the time that I was there. So getting that down on the page, it just was so easy for me because I could channel that feeling of, looking around the table and not seeing anyone who looks like you. So that was really part of it. But I also just thought about, what it would be like for two Black women to be in this space. And it came from an interaction I had with another Black woman in the bathroom at work, who I'd never seen before. We didn't have any kind of magic happen, no interaction, but that got me thinking about, who she was, and if there was some kind of other thing going on, and why she didn't, why we didn't have an interaction. Was there a charge to that? So all of those things were in my mind while writing.
I really feel that very much in that. And first, I do want to say that it is really, really cool to be able to do this with you and to have been able to read your work and sort of see you tackle this sort of what it feels like to kind of look around and be seeking out a kind of camaraderie, but the way that context that you're in complicates that. Like, that's very much one of the things that brought me to the page. And I think you do like a really excellent job showing how that kind of need of like communion, how that is hard, how that comes against livelihood, like how that comes against what it looks like to have to sort of camouflage yourself in order to, in order to advance. So that is, in reading your book, I very much felt touched by that.
Thank you.
I think that both, so I think, I mean, in experience as a Black female in largely white spaces, I think it's hard enough to navigate those discrepancies and the discomfort in social settings. But in both of your books, we're talking about workplace settings,
Yes.
which just adds another layer. Could you, well, I guess, could you expand a little bit on the idea of negotiating Blackness in white spaces, also with your characters, and then with yourselves, in I guess social settings and versus the workplace?
Yeah, I mean, I think camouflage, Raven, is a great way of describing it too. And I again, we'll talk about it, but I saw it in your book as well, of the two Black women working in publishing, and that those moments, there aren't that many of them, but they're so on point and so vivid, of just like the feeling you have seeing another Black person in those spaces. You just put it down so beautifully. But yeah, I mean, I think, right, like when I was writing this book, I was really thinking about my own experiences of really trying to navigate, the world of publishing, trying to navigate that space by really not calling attention to myself. Like that was a thing that I kind of wanted to do, because that's always kind of how I'd operated as a young person growing up in a lot of white spaces, of kind of just trying to blend in, camouflage again, because I really felt, I didn't want to be the different person. I also just wanted to be able to be me, and not feel like I had to fit into this box. So I think like negotiating the self is such a big part of my experiences growing up. And I mean, as I got a little older, I definitely do it less. I've been able to kind of find my own way of being myself, while also, still kind of fitting in. But I think it's a fine line, and it's different for everybody.
Definitely. I mean, it's a really, really hard line to walk, especially when you sort of understand that your margin for error is thin. So like, I feel like that then is like your incentive to like make yourself smaller, because any sort of dissent you understand is a threat to like your ability to eat. Mm-hmm. And I think that in your book, you do a really great job sort of talking about like the sort of granular details of class and the way they can sort of manifest, like even between two Black women. So like when I was writing Luster, like it was important to me that that the sort of light be shed, not just on this misconnection, this sort of complicated relationship that kind of doesn't happen between these two women, but the light is shed on the context that makes that sort of impossible, that pits them against each other. And I really, really feel like hearing you talk about writing, starting your draft in your cubicle, like it was the same. It was the same for me. I was pretty much, I was working in publishing at the time, and I was working like on the correction side and in ebooks.
Yes, so I know that side.
You like you write the draft in the email, like you're writing an email, or you do it like sort of in like the HTML of like, like you find ways, right, to kind of be a full human in those contexts. And it's hard and it's tricky, and it's like it's a dance, as you said.
Yeah. And I think context is important too. And when I was writing this book, because I didn't want Hazel to be that evil Black woman who is like, the reader's just like, oh, Hazel's the worst. Like I wanted her to be complex. And I think you put it so wonderfully, just like wanting to zoom out and look at, it's not just them. It's like there are forces at play pushing down on them as Black women. Like margin of error is so small, have to be twice as good. Like we know those mantras.
Yes.
We all know these mantras. It's hard.
Yeah. So I want to go back to what a little bit of what you were talking about your experience in the publishing world. So what was it like, I guess, putting this book out as an author with a perspective in the publishing world, and also during a pandemic? I mean, the rules are...
Ooh, yeah.
The game has changed.
I mean, for me, it was just like a whoa, surreal. So this book sold in February. Was riding high, on just all of that, because this is what I really wanted to do for most of my life. And then, of course, March was when everything started to turn, and like very apocalyptic, honestly, from what I remember. Just like, where do we go? Do we stay here? What's New York going to look like? What's the world going to look like? Are books going to be a thing? Was a question I had, even though I know that sounds crazy, but like priorities shift, right? So going on that emotional roller coaster, really trying to be happy and excited about it. But then that happening. And then, of course, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, just all of it, trying to really believe still that the book was what mattered. And I knew it mattered. But I think in that moment, and a lot of moments last summer, I really had to like do a lot of kind of different things to make sure I was taking care of myself and making sure I was really putting my best foot forward with the book. And so I was able to use fuel from my anger and my hopelessness actually going back to the page for like the first pass of the book. So trying to find a way, but it was rough.
Yeah. I mean, I really like fuel is like anger is, I think, one of the best fuels.
Oh yeah.
Truly like an animating force if ever there was one. But for me, it was like same thing. It was very, we were all adjusting to what was happening. Like we were all trying to figure out what it was and struggling to get our arms around it. And it did in that, as we were in the middle of this sort of huge existential event, the book felt small and strange, and it felt strange kind of standing beside it, kind of, but I do think that in moments like that, one of the best comforts is art. And I really, really hear you. Really hear you when you talk about sort of balancing that, what we absorb, I think, as Black people kind of out and about in the world, we kind of are, we have to contend with the sort of constant specter of violence, and we have to find language for how we feel about it and what it means. And we have to, like, I feel like being able to even articulate the thing is the first step, and that is a hard step.
Yeah.
So it was it's a hard thing, right? Kind of standing beside your art, especially if the threads of what is happening in the outside world are within the art you're doing.
Yes. Yes.
But yeah, it was wild. And I felt really ultimately kind of grateful that people were still coming out and engaging with the work.
Yeah, violence really, this really stuck out to me in what you were saying, Raven. And it reminded me of the epigraph to the other black girl, actually, which I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right. Tananarive Due?
Tananarive Due.
Tananarive Due. Okay,
Yeah.
I got my Italian accent here. So. And the quote is, "Black history is black horror." Could you explain why we chose that and how it relates to the story?
Yeah, I mean, so I heard her say that in Horror Noir, which is a fantastic documentary I can't recommend enough about Black people in horror. And it happened to come out a few weeks after I started writing the book. And definitely in its way, I mean, I'm a big horror fan, movies back to the 50s. I love it. But this documentary just is incredible because it looks at, the history of Black people in horror. It looks at Night of the Living Dead. It looks at Get Out, of course. And it just really gives you a sense of how far we've come in a lot of positive ways in representation, right, of Jordan Peele, but also still how far we need to go. And The Other Black Girl for me was that was one of my themes, just how much has changed, but then also how much hasn't changed in the ways in which this country has gaslit Black people for so long. And I mean, the company Wagner Books gaslights Nella, my protagonist, quite a bit. And I think in general, we are just gaslit. We are kind of given this things waved in front of our faces. I think in some cases, I think of this for like any kind of diversity talk, because there are these waves of things happening and there's the performative things happening, but there's always something, I don't know, it's never quite as sweet as it seems like it's going to be. And so, I don't know, I just wanted to look at that in the ways in which history repeats itself, the ways in which we still give ourselves a lot of time still to this country, to our jobs. I think it could be applied to a lot of things. And yet somehow we still get not a great deal of the time. And then of course, microaggressions. I loved that for me, that epigraph was also my way of signaling to the reader that there is something awry in the book to kind of signal the twist. So
I really, really love that quote. And when I was listening to you speak just now, I was thinking about like the fact that like that gaslighting is so much of the horror, right? And it is so deeply a part of the conditioning that we kind of have to undo, which is this inclination to mistrust our own eyes, right?
Yes.
To believe that our realities are not real. And so that is horror. And I think that like the sort of utility of art, like your book is putting down like the record of the thing. I really believe that those two things, like, it's funny, that quote sort of makes me think of, this is a quote that's super important to me as I was writing. It's one of Morgan Parker's poems. And it is, I do what I want because I could die at any time. I don't mean YOLO, I mean they are hunting me. And so there is like this, and like when I read that, it just like laid me out. I was like, well, this is going to be the thing that leads me through the text.
Yes.
And I really feel that in that our life trajectories, the art we make is really animated almost by like this understanding that we have that in this context, specifically this country, our lives are finite in a way that is that we can feel in everything we do. Our lives, our freedom is not given, and so we have to sort of seize seize where we can and sort of assert agency where we can. And so for me, that's the most important thing when sort of rendering any sort of Black womanhood on the page, is being true to those constraints and how that can sort of distort a life, but also the freedom in like acting on the world instead of letting it act on you.
Yeah, and I feel like we see that push-pull too with Edie and Lester. I think she's such a complicated, beautifully complicated character, devastating at times. Sometimes I just want to be like,
Me too.
But it's so important that she exists. Like, there needs to be a record of her experience too. And I'm still carrying that record around with me. I think I just think it's so important and beautiful.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when I was reading Lester, one of the things that the phrases that stuck out to me, I was like, oh my gosh, it's a hot mess Black girl. We don't get to be hot messes.
Yes, we don't. And I think that, again, that's so important. Like, we are not a monolith. I feel like I'm saying it all the time, but I'm kind of like willing it. I'm just like, the more I say it, the more it will become true, I hope. But really, that's so necessary, especially for young Black readers. I mean, I wish if I had read a book like Lester in high school or college, I just think about how different my own perception of the world, my Blackness myself would be. It's so necessary. So, thank you.
I mean, I feel like both of our books are in conversation with that, like the idea of disorder, right? Like the kind of anxiety we feel about any kind of unruliness, and the ways, like the really different ways that Black women go about like either containment or just completely splaying.
Yes.
You know, there's like a middle ground. I suppose like both extremes are like not sustainable, right? But it still is a beautiful and radical thing when you see that sort of refusal of that margin for error. Yes. And you like just do the thing.
Yes. I love it.
So I think this is giving me I've gotten a lot of like chills, little flashbacks to some, I want to say maybe like sci-fi things that I've seen, and I wanted to go in a little bit more into your choice of genre for this book. I think there was a thriller by a Black female author that came out last year. I want to say When No One Was Watching.
Oh, I love that book. Yes.
That I remember thinking like, I don't know that I've ever read this genre by a Black woman, and you know, it's all these Scandinavian male authors that have got it unlocked, but
it's in the water. It's in the water.
But did you have what were your influences, or what was your experience with this genre in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I read When No One Is Watching last year. It's so good. It really goes there in the end too. Like, I feel like people think I go there, but like it goes there. It's so good. But yeah, for me, I mean, some non horror books were my inspiration. Passing by Nella Larson is one big one. I don't think it's technically a thriller. I think it's cataloged as something else, but there is so much subtext, so much drama, so much tension between the two main characters in that book that it's just, I don't know. I feel like there are just so many parallels, and that really, I was reading that like the month before I started this book. So, and my character is named after Nella Larson. So that's one title. I mean, Octavia Butler, her book Kindred, which I read for the first time in high school, which made a big impact on me. The ways she plays with genre and uses this sci-fi trope of time travel that is so, you know, it's been done. We've seen it before, but it's so good. Like, it's the way that she uses it to really drive home just the terrors of slavery in a way that kind of literally takes the idea of like, that I think all Black people have at some point in their life. Not to make a really big blanket claim, but I do think for me, I've thought about what would my experience be like if I had been a slave. And I think about my ancestors. I think about the people that got me here, essentially. And that book just ties all of that in, of this woman in the 1970s going back in time, being pulled back in time against her will too, right? And that, I think that that's symbolic itself, of the fact that she really has no control and doesn't know necessarily when it's going to happen a lot of the time. So that was also one of my inspirations.
Nice. Let's see. We're getting quite a few audience questions. I'm excited.
Oh,
but
yeah.
first, something I wanted to also bring up. Let's see. So, the covers of these books are so phenomenal, and they have quite a lot in common.
Yes.
I'd like to ask both of you about the significance of black hair in, yeah, as a theme, or just in your stories, in your characters, and then yeah, if you could talk a little bit more about these awesome covers, that'd be great.
Raven, do you want to?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm really lucky in that really early in the process, like that was the first, I want to shout out Na Kim. She is like a designer extraordinaire at FSG. And it was the first cover I got. And it was that one. It was incredible. I knew immediately, not only like the sort of subject, but the colors are kind of, I mean, they're lustrous. Sorry to use that word. But it sort of has that sort of disco ethos that I really wanted, that sort of earnest, like kind of, I sent a bunch of like references that were very much like very color forward, because I do want that joy to sort of be like a part of the sort of visual representation of the book. But she knocked it out of the park. And when I saw the natural hair and the texture, that was sort of when I knew that I wanted to, I knew that I was going to go with that cover art. But it was really a really cool process, and I got really lucky on that front. And it also kind of, if you're far away from it, it becomes more abstract. So I love the idea of a cover that kind of changes the closer you are to it. And I really think your book does that as well.
Thank you. I'm actually like looking at your book now as you're talking. I'm like, oh yeah, because I love, which I kind of just noticed because of like the way the light is right now, but you can see the strands, some of the strands in the cut, like some of them are glowing. It's just so good. It's so good. Oh, another thing I was going to say about your cover is you mentioned the disco, and it reminds me of the music reference. I love the music references in your book, but could heaven ever be like this? There's mention of that song, and I just heard that for the first time like a couple years ago. And
isn't it great?
It's so good. But this cover is like a surge of just that vibe, and I just love it. Yeah, I mean, I also had a very easy kind of cover situation too. I think, and Raven and I were talking about this before a little bit, but like I've heard horror stories from other Black authors, just about that conversation. And it can be tricky, I think, for a lot of different authors. And so I went in, having that in my mind, but my team at Atria, I mean, from the start, like my wonderful agent, Stephanie Delman, and I sat down, and we didn't sit down in person because this was during COVID, but we both sat down around the same time, and we're trying to figure out, a list of Black artists who we thought might be great for the cover. Because I knew I wanted a Black artist. I knew I wanted some kind of piece of art that really got just that reaction of like, this is about Black people. Like, this is blackity black, blackness all over. And my team reached out to Temi Coker, Nigerian-born artist who I believe he lives in Texas now. His art's amazing. Check him out. But he had done this piece of artwork called, I wish I had it. I'm still waiting on my framed version of it to put up on the wall. But
that's a great idea.
Yeah, Stephanie got me the original artwork. Recommend looking it up, everyone. Yeah. It's beautiful. So this was taken from his artwork that what he was commissioned to make for, I believe, Twitter, called My Black is Beautiful. And they were able to license the work. And I'm so excited about it because, again, the Blackness, there's a royal kind of feeling in the colors. And I think it was between this cover and another cover in the first round of cover talks. And this one was it. And I just was so excited about it. And it felt like it just was a mashup of everything, because Black hair is such a big part of this book. Conversations about it. It starts with the smell of hair product. It's just slipped in throughout, because I know for me that Black hair has been a big part of my personal journey in learning and loving to accept myself as I am, rather than, feeling like I have to fit to another standard.
Yes, I feel like that actually, could just be a book of itself, right? Like sort of the journey that you're on with your own hair as a Black woman, and like the sort of different iterations that you kind of move through as you grow, and like so that many. Too was like so many. That was like a huge important. Like I knew that was going to be a great site of communion between like Edie and Akilah, because that is such it's such a vulnerable kind of terrain. And it definitely is, I think, like for many of us, our earliest moments of care are up in there.
Yeah.
So it is like, it does feel, you feel that when I look at the cover and I see this, I'm just
the pic. I know. How did I forget to talk about the pic? Yeah. I mean, that's what I wanted. And I mean, I had an Afro pic. I have an Afro pic like this with the fist. My dad had one. He told me back when he had hair. Love you, Dad. And so it felt also just, I mean, I hadn't said I want a pic, but we got a pic, and it just magic.
I think that the subject of Black hair, and then being coupled with negotiating Blackness in workspaces, just reminds me of it. It was New York, correct? That passed the law,
yes,
an anti-discrimination law for Black hair, right?
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, is it any surprise that it was New York?
I know, right? Yeah.
Which brings me to something that I thought of. Do you know how people say, or I don't know if you're Sex and the City fans, but they say, "Oh, but New York is the fifth main character."
Yes,
I think it's interesting that both of your books are set largely in New York, even though New York being, a diversity, like a hub. It's always been a really diverse place, and where there's a lot of Blackness on display. But could you talk about the significance of the setting of New York?
Yeah, I mean, for me, New York is really where I came into myself, I think, as a young 20-something. I moved here to do my MFA at the New School. And part of why I think I would have done it eventually, but part of why I did my big chop, and I think it was like 6 years ago now, was because it was one of the things just really inspiring me. Around this time, there were protests happening all over the city. I was also just seeing other Black people riding the train with different hair. And I think having come from UNC Chapel Hill, which is a lovely area, but also it's a bubble. Being in Brooklyn, being in this space was really influential to me as a person. So I felt like that would really be part of what drove Nella to have her own kind of awakening and like get to know Malika, and there's just that experience. So that was a big part of it for me. I also think like there's something really interesting when I was commuting to Midtown from Brooklyn. It's such an interesting shift. I felt the shift going on the train riding into Midtown. It's just a whole different world. and speed. And so I really had a lot of fun showing how that influenced. That was just as much influential on Nella, as her having her friends, right? Like that she has her outside of work time and then she has her work time, Manhattan and Brooklyn. And so those were all just like swimming around my mind when I was writing.
I definitely feel that. Like I mean, part of the reason why the setting is New York is I just like, it's like the city and place with my heart. I'm from the Bronx, and I spent a good amount of my childhood upstate, but it is something that I think kind of would have come out of me regardless. But it just so happened that it starts with Edie, and that's where her job is. That's like it's in New York, and that is where publishing is, right? So
right.
I remember I kind of moved away for a while to DC to work as a librarian. When I knew I wanted to come back to work in publishing, I knew you'd have to come back to New York. So that is one reason it sort of started off that way. But the speed you mentioned, there is sort of a different and more intense, perhaps even overwhelming cadence to that city that I think really gives itself over to the kind of chaos of the narrative and of the characters. And that is sort of my favorite thing to write toward, which is that sort of the messiness. But in both our books that are that very much look at work, I do think that too is parallel to the idea of this city, where you come here and you try and make something of yourself, and you look to each side and you see that you're sort of among sort of like minds who are on their grind, whatever that is. And so I do think that setting is sort of conducive to a person who is doing their best, like trying their best to advance and to carve something, carve like a place for themselves, in the middle of this sort of this chaos, but this chaos that is often sort of packaged as opportunity.
I'm actually from New York too, and I will say that I think it's a perfect setting for a thriller / horror / all the messiness.
There's a lot of horror happening, sometimes in front of your very eyes.
Yeah. So I think I'm about to get into audience questions now. We have quite a few. I hope we can get through them all. Let's see. This question is from Sierra. She asks, how did you navigate the publishing industry as a Black employee, and how do you navigate the industry now as an author? What are the differences?
Ooh, that's a really good question. Yeah, I mean, I honestly had a really easy time for the most part, I think, fitting into publishing in a lot of ways. I was talking earlier about just how I've grown really comfortable in white spaces. And so it was easy for me to slip in. I'm also just a generally very agreeable person. I like for everyone to get along. And so, I definitely had that approach. But definitely as things went on, I did feel, very fatigued and very tired for multiple reasons, of wanting to work on my own book and getting promoted to assistant editor, which should have been really exciting for me. It just didn't have the same appeal. And I think that, plus, again, looking around the table, not seeing anyone who looked like me, not feeling like change was happening fast enough, not feeling like I'd necessarily be able to work on the books that I wanted to work on either. All of those things really kind of helped make my decision easier. But now, I mean, navigating the other side, it's really interesting because when I was on the other side, going back to my publishing days, I definitely had ideas of what it would be like. But those were ideas pre-pandemic. So I definitely imagine like marching into the publishing house, being the Black author in the publishing house, like talking to my team face to face, and being online for most of it it was an adjustment that I still just feel really lucky, and also feel like I can speak up about the cover I mentioned before, like making that list. my team has been amazing in terms of now trying to get as many different readers for the book, making sure we're reaching Black audiences because, oh, kitty. Sorry. It's like, wow. Yes. But really making sure that I do advocate for myself, because that can be hard. I think, again, working in an assistant position, I was just really used to going with the flow. And so really making sure at the end of the day, like, I know what I want and make sure that I speak up about it has been great. But I fortunately have, again, had a just really nice experience as an author.
Yeah, I mean, I really truly relate to that. I mean, being on the other side, having worked in publishing, like you do a lot of like kind of secret private research. You take notes, you kind of see what books are coming in, and you understand the market in like in a more profound way, I think. That
Yes.
both is like a kind of assists you, but also can create a kind of anxiety.
Oh, yes.
About the market's needs.
Yes.
But it was hugely educational. I definitely, a lot of the sort of fuel I had in sort of those first parts of rendering Edie's journey, trying to carve out a living and trying to navigate those professional spaces, absolutely came from the sort of way the adjustments you make at work in order to kind of advance. But on the other side, it felt, I think, before more theoretical. On the other side, yes. it is still surprising as closely as you might work with authors or with editors. It is sort of a totally different ball game, but you have like a different respect for everything that has to happen for a book to come out. Yes. All the people who have to work in order for your book to come out. And that feels beautiful when you kind of understand sort of the passion that is behind you and the sort of like that kind of communal effort. But of course, we're in a moment right now where we are reckoning with how white these bases are, how white these lists are. And I personally have also had like a really kind of a dream of an experience. Like my publisher has done so well by me, but I do think that we want ideally not to be exceptions. We want, that to be the rule.
That is, yes, that's so true. And that's my hope too. And I just have a quick, hope it's okay if I ask you this question, because I know for me, when I was going to the other side of being in publishing and then being an author, like when I was writing, I definitely had some thoughts about whether or not the publishing world would be into The Other Black Girl, would be into the talk about white people and the way that it is in the book. And of course, whether they thought there would be audiences who wanted to read all of these references that I make and all of those things. And I'm curious, like, did you also have, I mean, it's a loaded question, but like, did you also have kind of thoughts about that when you were writing Lester?
I absolutely did. Because I mean, it's sort of like, as a once sort of former professional woman who was like working within that industry, who was sort of tasked with the kind of containment we were talking about. Like the book is the opposite of that. Like you're putting the record down, you're telling the truth, and sometimes the truth is ugly. And so that was a real sort of personal and emotional shift I kind of had to make, a real like deliberate choice I had to make to just say the thing. And I know that you felt that. It very much is. I do think that timing is everything. Like I can't be like coy and say that telling the truth is like that audiences have always been like receptive to that kind of thing. But I do think that is the point of what we do and the point of art that's good. And that in general, people are receptive to the truth thing, even if it's difficult.
Yeah, I agree.
Wow. Ooh, we're getting into it. So there are a few different questions about the publishing industry. I'm trying to see if I can consolidate any of them. Well, so there's one question by Nikki who says they recently left the publishing because they couldn't take the mistreatment of BIPOC any longer. If it's not too personal, what was your breaking point, and what do you think it will take for the industry to change? Yeah, I guess, yeah. What will it take?
Oh.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
That is a big
You're
one.
the expert.
I mean, I would say breaking point was, I mean, I think, Zakiya, you mentioned once sort of like coming to work and feeling that, like getting the thing you wanted and feeling that fatigue. Mm-hmm. Like it's always sort of a weird phenomenon when you're kind of working kind of tirelessly toward a goal and then you get it and you realize what you want has shifted. Yeah. You realize what you need has sort of shifted. And I think for a very long time, I really truly bought into the idea that like as long as I kept my head down and I did the quiet work, then I would have a path forward. Yeah. Obviously that's not that's just not how it works. And so I think that you have that reckoning over and over again, and you kind of measure that up against the sort of personal toll, and you ask yourself if it's worth it, if it's sustainable. Mm-hmm. And for me, I had spent like 6 or so years sort of writing just like in my bedroom, like trying to get anything published, like poetry, short stories, and in the book. And I really felt that it was time. I can't say it's sort of like an intangible thing, that moment. It's like a kind of collection of moments, but there was like one moment, of course, where I felt that the finite, I felt that thing we were talking about, that the time was finite. I felt that thing that Morgan Parker was talking about. Mm-hmm. Like I have to do this thing because this time is precious and it's not given, especially for us, which sounds like kind of grim, but it animated me. It animated me to kind of do what I wanted. And what I wanted was to do the work that really meant something to me. And at the time that was the book. And it wasn't like a kind of easy or flippant decision. Like you also write like beautifully about sort of the sort of dilemma of working in an industry where you might need outside support. Mm-hmm. That is also a kind of like a really concrete reason why I think the industry sort of sheds a lot of talent of people of color. So it was like there were financials I had to think about that kept me in it way longer than I maybe would have been.
Yes.
At a certain point, I really just had to do the thing.
Mm. Yes, all of that. Yes. So real. Financials for real too. I mean, the pay in publishing is garbage for a lot of people. To live in New York off of what you're making is next to impossible unless you have outside help, you have someone else living with you. And so, I mean, I mentioned earlier, I had that experience of getting assigned a book and knowing that should be right. But then after that, I like went and cried to my coworker about how unhappy I was about getting more responsibility. And then a few months later, when I had the idea for this book, my partner, turned out at the time, it also worked out, he was moving in with me. So that was like, I was like, okay, this is aligning. I got this idea for the book. I'm actually having fun writing this in my cube. Like this, it's exactly what you said, Raven. Like this feels right. This feels like what I need to be doing. After being in publishing for as long as I was, which isn't that long, but it can be very exhausting. I just knew that it wasn't the way for me anymore. And the feeling, I had so many pits in my stomach, if that's possible, about quitting, because I did feel in a way like I'd been defeated. Cause I did have that thought, am I going to be like the Black editor here, the female, the person here that they don't have? But ultimately I had to put myself first, and I'm glad I did. And I'm glad you did too, Raven.
I'm glad that both of you did. Otherwise, we might not have these fantastic books. Okay, let's see. Um, Shani writes, I recently heard about your book being adapted into a Hulu series with this emoji.
Yes, that's me all the time these days.
What will your role be in writing/creating the series?
Yeah, I am co-writing the TV series right now with Rashida Jones, which is just saying it. A few days ago, my mom was like, "How are you saying all these things so casually?" And I was like, I don't know. I can't be like ecstatic every single time because it's just like it's so overwhelming how amazing it is. But I'm so excited. She's wonderful, and to have my team at Temple Hill, who is producing, Tara Duncan and Hulu, they're all really excited about it and wanted me to be a part of it as much as I wanted to be. They wanted to be writing, and I was like, sure. I don't really know how to do any of this, but the fact that you feel like I can give it a shot, I really appreciated that, especially when it's your baby. So I've been reading up on my screenwriting, doing my homework of watching TV, and just like working on the pilot these days. So hopefully things seem to be moving at a really nice pace, but it's also, who knows that world? I don't. I'm still learning. So check back in.
Cool. This is something that that came to mind as you were both discussing your all right, Kitty, your experiences, and that is who is or your books, this book and Lester. Who are they to, and who are they for? If there is a difference there.
Man, I would say that like for me it's like the same. It's the same answer. It was
Okay.
Black women. Like I wrote this and I felt as a deeply fallible and sort of messy Black woman myself that I wanted to write away from the idea that the tidiness would kind of earn me like the right to personhood and respect. I think that it was important for me to kind of put that down, and like many Black women before me have had that project and sort of paved the way that I could write this book, with a chaotic kind of Black woman. But it was important to me that I write away from like an obedient Black woman. It was important that she be able to kind of respond when she's hurt, and also when she's seeking intimacy, that she be able to sort of express that humanity in all of its contradictions and all of its mess, that she be able to be sexual, that she be able to be wrong, that she be able to be angry and hurting, because I do think the idea of stoicism hurts us. It sort of it makes it so that we can't do the thing that is human, which is feel.
Yes. Wow. Yes. Stoicism. Yeah. I mean, we're forced to a lot of times just be okay all the time. Yeah. And that's impossible. We're not okay. Turn on the news. We're not okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, same. I was writing this book for Black women, really writing it to myself, to be honest, at first. When I first started writing, I think I was thinking a lot about my younger self, my own insecurities with my Blackness when I was younger, my hair, all of those things were really important for me to get on the page. And then I ultimately hoped that would resonate with other Black women, whether or not you have 4C hair. But I feel like we have had similar experiences, and we were talking earlier about our relationships with our hair, about what it's like to constantly walk around the world or walk through the world and know that split decisions and judgments are made about us just in an immediate moment, and we have no control over that, no matter how hard we try. And so I really wanted to talk about that, to talk about the beauty of Black friendship with Black women, because while there is Nella and Hazel's very tense relationship, we also get to see Nella outside in the world, in her safe space. We can have joys, we have work, but our work is not all that we do. It shouldn't be all that we do. But then also talk about, the ways that Black people, we can also just be wrong to each other. Like, I think that I've had so many responses from people about having their own hazels and in their worlds. And that to me is really fascinating. Like, why do we do that to each other? We know why. They're more, it's beyond us again. A lot of the times we feel there's this, there can't be more of us in these spaces, but just really getting at that and all the joys and all the things we still need to figure out. And then also, I do want white people also to just see us without us constantly having to explain everything. With the references, with the hair conversations. We can be messy. We also have created our own space, our own codes, our own everything. And I think that I'm excited that I can open that up for people. So just a few people. Wrote the book just for like a couple people.
I think that, I might just have time for one more question, but something I want to sneak in there. So I guess both of the main characters in your books, I want to say, have a lot in common with your persons, and I'm wondering if you could give me a little bit of a clue of something, that a characteristic that was written into your character that you do not identify with.
So, I mean, I would say that, I was actually just, I think, talking to Brian Washington about this the other day, which is that, like, I sometimes feel an envy of sort of Edie's freedom in the world. Like, we kind of can see both sides. We see the performance, and we see the sort of like the naked internal wanting, but as a real human Black woman in the world, I do not necessarily enjoy the sort of like the kind of wanton, I don't know, the wanton sort of like freedom with which she moves through the world. And I kind of wrote her like that. That's sort of part of the chaos, is that she is a person who will go to her lover's house and let herself in and feel his wife's clothing, like that is sort of a science fiction of its own. I really just, I wrote that because I wanted to see that and perhaps envy that ability to be able to sort of be id and less super ego, like to be sort of that like naked thing as opposed to like the curated thing. And so writing her was really freeing and liberating to me. So I think that's the way we differ, but that is sort of was the fun of writing the book.
Wow. She's so liberating. I know we keep talking about how messy she is, but I also just saw so many parts of myself in her, of like, and then also wanting to have that same kind of agency. And I think, I would say a similar thing, not so much thinking about Nella, although I do kind of have an answer for Nella. I think the thing that happens at the very end that I won't say, I don't think that would have, if I were, that's where we differ. I will just leave it there. But since that's cheating, I will mention my Kendra Ray character, who says things that are maybe poorly timed, maybe poorly delivered. She does not care one way or the other what happens regarding that. And I think that agency is something that I wish I had, that kind of unabashedness. I don't think I would necessarily time the things the way that she does, but that just freedom and that, I need to, I'm like tiptoeing around all of these spoilers, but I was about to say something else. It's like, no, that's too much. But just, again, that I think that's so beautiful, Raven, the wanting to be naked, to be vulnerable and exposed, and like being okay with that versus like overanalyzing every kind of thing, which is exactly who I am a lot of the time. Can totally identify with that.
Well, with that, I really want to thank both of you once more for putting these stories out into the world. It's something that keeps coming up in our Uncle Bobbie's author talk, just representation. It's an understatement to say that it matters, but it's so inspiring to be able to have these stories now. I'm thinking about, when I was a little girl, what a difference it would have made, and hoping that now the little black girls of the world have a lot more options to choose from. So thank you both so much. This was an amazing conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
This has been like amazing to be a part of this. I'm just loving seeing your bookstore.
Oh, thank you. Same. And also, thank you, Uncle Bobbie. I hope I can get to Philly sometime when things are safer and visit you in person. But for now, this is just wonderful. So thank you.
Yes, that would be awesome. Everyone, go get this book. You can find out what the spoilers are for yourself. And Luster is also going to be out in paperback June 8th. So get them together and then have a book club.
Yes.
Thanks everyone for being here, and happy reading. Have a good night.